The Zephyrian Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian, its walls lined with floating holographic displays showing tribute flows from 1,000 worlds. At the chamber's heart, 12 beings sat on thrones carved from compressed neutron matter, their forms shifting between states of energy and matter at will. For 10,000 years, they had ruled the galaxy as gods, and the universe had bent to their will. Supreme Overlord THYSSCAR materialized fully into physical form, his crystalline body crackling with contained stellar energy. The other council members turned their attention to him as he began to speak, his voice resonating through dimensions most species couldn't even perceive. "The humans have refused our demand," THYSSCAR announced, his words causing the very air to shimmer. "Not only have they refused to surrender their homeworld for our new temple complex, but they've had the audacity to declare what they call independence from our divine rule." Councillor Velnath, whose form resembled a constantly shifting nebula, let out what could only be described as cosmic laughter. A single world of primitives? They achieved faster-than-light travel only 2 centuries ago. Their entire civilization is but a blink in our eternal existence. "Perhaps," THYSSCAR replied, though something in his tone suggested uncertainty. "However, our intelligence reports indicate they've been unusually active in their system. Ship movements, construction projects, energy signatures we don't quite understand." Councillor Mordun, appearing as a writhing mass of dark matter, scoffed. "What could they possibly construct that would concern beings who reshape reality itself? We who have consumed stars and moved planets for our pleasure? Send a single subjugation fleet. Make an example of them. Let the galaxy remember why they call us gods." The decision was made with the casual indifference of beings who had never encountered true resistance. The Zephyrian subjugation fleet consisted of 50 vessels, each one a masterpiece of technology so advanced it bordered on magic. Their hulls were forged from collapsed spacetime, their weapons could ignite stars, and their shields could deflect supernovas. Fleet Commander Zargoth had overseen 1,000 subjugations. Entire civilizations had surrendered at the mere sight of his vessels dropping out of hyperspace. The humans would be no different. Their small blue world would submit, as all worlds did, or it would burn. The fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, expecting to find a primitive civilization cowering behind their single inhabited planet. Instead, they found something that made even Zargoth pause. The asteroid belt was gone. Where millions of rocks had once orbited the sun, now floated a vast construction unlike anything in Zephyrian records. It was clearly artificial, but its design philosophy was alien even to beings who had catalogued 10,000 species. Instead of the flowing, organic curves favored by most advanced civilizations, this structure was angular, brutal, and undeniably functional. It bristled with weapon emplacements, sensor arrays, and launch bays. And it was massive, easily the size of a small moon. "Analysis," Zargoth commanded his science officer. "The structure appears to be some kind of weapons platform," the officer reported, his usually confident voice trembling slightly. "But the energy readings." "Commander, it's drawing power directly from the star itself." "The humans have somehow built a solar tap." "Impossible. Only the Council has mastered stellar engineering." "Nevertheless, the readings are clear. And, Commander, there's more." The tactical display updated, showing the full scope of human preparations. The space between Earth and Mars swarmed with activity. Hundreds of smaller installations, each one a fortress in its own right, created a layered defense network. Ships moved between them, not the sleek vessels of most spacefaring races, but blocky, armored craft that looked like they were built to take punishment and keep fighting. "How many ships?" Zargoth asked. "Difficult to determine precisely. At least 5,000 combat vessels of various sizes." "But, Commander, that's not what concerns me most." "The largest human ships, their reading is artificial gravity signatures comparable to our own dreadnoughts." This was impossible. The Zephyrians had ruled for 10 millennia precisely because no other species could match their technology. Their ships were living extensions of their own reality-warping powers. How could primitives who had barely left their own star system construct vessels on that scale? Zargoth opened a communication channel to the human fleet. It was customary to offer surrender terms before beginning destruction, though he expected the usual pattern of desperate pleading followed by inevitable submission. The face that appeared on his screen was not what he expected. The human was female, middle-aged by their standards, with graying hair and eyes that held no fear whatsoever. She wore a simple uniform without the elaborate decorations most species use to show status. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force," she said calmly. "You are trespassing in human space. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Zargoth was so surprised by this response that he forgot his usual intimidation protocols. "You dare threaten us? We are the Zephyrian Council's representatives. We are gods." Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. "Gods don't need fleets. Gods don't demand tribute. Gods don't rule through fear. You're just another species with advanced technology and delusions of grandeur. And you're not welcome here. Your species will burn for this insolence." Zargoth roared, his divine nature manifesting as coronas of energy around his form. "I offer you one final chance: surrender your world for our divine purposes, submit to our eternal rule, and we will grant you the mercy of servitude rather than extinction." "Counteroffer," Admiral Chen replied, her voice still maddeningly calm. "Leave our system now, and we won't demonstrate why your divine rule is about to end." Zargoth cut the communication and turned to his fleet. "All vessels, assume attack formation. Prepare to show these primitives the true meaning of divine power." The Zephyrian fleet advanced, their ships beginning to glow with the otherworldly energies they commanded. Reality itself seemed to bend around their vessels as they prepared their reality-warping weapons. This would be over in minutes. Then, the human weapons opened fire. The first indication that something was wrong came when Zargoth's shields that had withstood the collapse of entire star systems, flickered under the impact of human projectiles. The second indication came when those projectiles punched through the shields entirely and began tearing holes in his hull. "Report," he demanded. "Commander, they're using some kind of kinetic penetrator rounds moving at significant fractions of light speed." "But that's not the worst part. The rounds appear to be made of condensed matter, the same technology we use for our thrones." This was beyond impossible. Condensed matter was a Zephyrian secret, a technology that required the ability to manipulate fundamental forces. How could humans have developed it independently? The answer came as the human fleet engaged. Their ships moved with a coordination that spoke of artificial intelligence networks beyond anything the Zephyrians had encountered. More disturbing was their tactical doctrine. While most species tried to fight the Zephyrian ship-to-ship, the humans swarmed. For every Zephyrian vessel, 20 human ships converged, each one accepting terrible damage while ensuring their target was destroyed. "They're not fighting like a civilization protecting their homeworld," Zargoth's tactical officer observed as another Zephyrian ship exploded. "They're fighting like they've been preparing for this specific scenario for decades." That's when Zargoth realized the truth. The human primitive civilization hadn't just refused to submit, they had spent the last 2 centuries preparing specifically for war with the Zephyrians. Every ship design, every weapon system, every tactic had been developed with one purpose: killing gods. The massive station that had replaced the asteroid belt suddenly came alive. Weapon ports that had seemed merely impressive revealed themselves as planet-killing devices. Beams of focused stellar energy reached across space, each one carrying enough power to crack a moon. But these weapons weren't aimed at the Zephyrian fleet. They were aimed at the hyperspace emergence points. "Commander," his navigator screamed. "They're collapsing the hyperspace nodes. We can't retreat." Zargoth finally understood the scope of the trap. The humans hadn't just built weapons, they had built a prison. The Sol system had been turned into an execution chamber specifically designed for gods. As his fleet died around him, Zargoth managed to get one final message through to the Council before his own ship's power core breached. The message was simple: the humans are not what they seem. They are not primitives. They are something else entirely. Something that has been waiting for us. The last thing Zargoth saw before his ship exploded was Admiral Chen's face on his screen, no longer calm but showing what could only be described as predatory satisfaction. "Send a message to your council," she said.
Tell them the age of gods is over. Humanity is coming.
On the distant council homeworld of HFY Prime, THYSSCAR received Zargotha's final transmission with growing horror. The entirety of a subjugation fleet vessels that had conquered 1,000 worlds had been destroyed. Not defeated, not forced to retreat, but completely annihilated with no survivors.
How is this possible? Velnath demanded, her nebular form flickering with distress. One fleet should have been enough to pacify 100 primitive worlds. They were not primitive, THYSSCAR realized aloud.
The energy signatures, the construction projects, the unusual activity, they've been preparing for us.
But how did they know to prepare? How did they know we existed? Counselor Mordun manifested more solidly, his dark matter form coalescing into something approaching physicality. It doesn't matter how they knew. What matters is that they've declared war on gods themselves. No species in galactic history has dared such blasphemy. We must respond with overwhelming force.
Yes, THYSSCAR agreed.
Summon the Great Fleet.
Every vessel, every weapon, every divine warrior at our disposal.
We will not just subjugate this human species, we will erase them from existence itself. We will unmake their world, scatter their atoms across the void, and ensure that no trace of their blasphemy remains.
But, even as he spoke these words, THYSSCAR felt something he hadn't experienced in 10,000 years of absolute rule: doubt. The humans had been too prepared, too ready, too confident. Species that were about to be destroyed didn't speak with the calm certainty he had seen in that human admiral's eyes. They spoke like that when they knew something their enemies didn't. 3 days later, long-range sensors detected massive human fleet movements. Ships were emerging from hidden bases throughout their system, not the few thousand vessels initially observed, but tens of thousands. And they weren't staying in the Sol system. They were moving outward, toward Zephyrian space.
Impossible, Velnath whispered. They couldn't have built such a fleet in only 2 centuries.
It would take 1,000 years, even with our level of technology.
THYSSCAR was beginning to suspect they had underestimated more than just human military capability.
Send reconnaissance probes to every system within 50 light-years of the human homeworld.
I want to know exactly what we're dealing with.
The reports that came back over the following days painted a picture that challenged everything the Zephyrians thought they knew about galactic civilization. The humans hadn't just built a fleet in 2 centuries, they had been building for much longer. Hidden bases in systems previously thought uninhabited, massive shipyards disguised as asteroid fields, entire planets converted to military production.
Most disturbing of all, the human expansion wasn't random.
Their bases formed a clear pattern, a network of fortified positions creating a corridor directly toward Zephyrian space. They hadn't just been preparing for war, they had been preparing for invasion.
How long? THYSSCAR demanded of his intelligence chief. How long have they been planning this?
Based on the scope of the construction and the sophistication of their concealment methods, at least 500 years, my lord.
Possibly longer. 500 years.
The humans had been planning this war since before they had even achieved faster-than-light travel.
But that raised an even more disturbing question: how had they known about the Zephyrians that long ago?
The answer came in a transmission broadcast across all Zephyrian communication frequencies. It was Admiral Chen again, but this time she wasn't alone. Behind her stood representatives of dozens of species the Zephyrians recognized as their own subjects, worlds that had been conquered and, supposedly pacified centuries ago.
Greetings, Zephyrian Council, Admiral Chen began.
Allow me to introduce the representatives of the Liberation Coalition.
For 500 years, we have been secretly preparing for this moment.
Every world you conquered, every species you enslaved, every civilization you destroyed, they all left refugees.
Those refugees found us. They told us about you. And, together, we have prepared.
The camera panned across the assembled representatives, and THYSSCAR felt another unfamiliar emotion: fear. Species they had thought extinct stood beside the humans. Technologies they had thought permanently suppressed had obviously been preserved and improved upon. The scope of the deception was staggering. You call yourselves gods, Admiral Chen continued.
But gods don't die. Gods don't fear. And, very soon, you're going to experience both. The human race was never your target, we were your executioners. Every refugee ship that reached our system, every survivor who shared their knowledge, every warrior who swore vengeance against you, they all had one purpose: to ensure that when the day of reckoning came, we would be ready. The transmission switched to tactical displays showing the true scope of human and allied preparations. Not thousands of ships, but millions. Not just in the Sol system, but in hundreds of systems, all connected by a supply network that had taken centuries to establish. The entire outer rim of Zephyrian space was surrounded. "We are coming for you," Admiral Chen concluded. "All of us. Every species you thought you had broken, every world you thought you had conquered, every survivor you thought was too weak to matter. We are the reckoning you never saw coming. We are the proof that gods can die." The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Zephyrians faced an enemy that outnumbered them, outgunned them, and had spent centuries planning their destruction. How do we fight an enemy that knows everything about us while we know nothing about them? Velnath asked. THYSSCAR had no answer. The Age of Gods was ending, and they had been blind to their approaching doom until it was too late to stop it. The Zephyrian Great Fleet assembled at the edge of their home system represented the accumulated military might of 10,000 years of divine rule. 5,000 vessels of impossible beauty and terrible power, each one capable of reducing a planet to cosmic dust. The smallest destroyer in the fleet could have conquered the Roman Empire in an afternoon. The largest dreadnought could crack a moon with a single shot. Supreme Overlord THYSSCAR stood in the command center of the flagship Divine Wrath, surrounded by holographic displays showing the approaching human coalition. His crystalline form pulsed with barely contained stellar energy as he tried to comprehend the scope of the threat arrayed against them. "Final count, Fleet Admiral Kexthal," he commanded. The Fleet Admiral, whose form resembled a constantly shifting geometric pattern, consulted the tactical displays with growing unease. The enemy fleet numbers approximately 1.7 million vessels across all classes. "However, my lord, these numbers may not reflect the full threat. Our intelligence suggests the humans have developed modular ship construction. Individual vessels can combine into larger entities during combat." Modular construction? Counselor Velnath materialized beside THYSSCAR, her nebular form flickering with agitation. "That's impossible. The structural stresses alone would tear apart any vessel attempting such a maneuver. Nevertheless, our observations confirm it. The humans call them fleet formations, but they appear to be individual ships that can lock together to form what is essentially a mobile space station. Their largest confirmed formation consisted of over 200 individual vessels operating as a single unit." THYSSCAR absorbed this information with growing dread. Bad enough that the humans had somehow matched their numbers, but if they could also combine their vessels during combat, the tactical implications were staggering. What do we know of their weapon capabilities? Based on the destruction of the subjugation fleet, they appear to have mastered condensed matter weapons. Additionally, they employ what they term reality anchors, devices that prevent the use of our dimensional manipulation abilities within a certain radius. This last piece of information sent shock waves through the assembled council members. For 10 millennia, their ability to manipulate reality itself had made them effectively invincible. No weapon could touch them because they could simply alter the fundamental forces that govern physics in their immediate vicinity. If the humans had found a way to neutralize that advantage. How is such a thing possible? Mordun demanded, his dark matter form coalescing into something approaching solid matter. Reality manipulation is not technology, it is divine power, granted to us by our transcendence beyond mere physical existence. Admiral Kexthal hesitated before answering. "My lord, our scientists believe the humans may have reverse-engineered our abilities. Every refugee ship that reached them would have contained survivors who had witnessed our power firsthand. Given enough time and resources, a sufficiently advanced civilization might be able to develop countermeasures." 500 years, THYSSCAR murmured. "They've had 500 years to study us, to prepare, to plan." He turned to the tactical display showing the approaching coalition forces. "Show me their fleet composition." The display updated, revealing the true scope of human preparations. The core fleet consisted of human vessels, angular, practical designs that prioritized function over form. But, surrounding them were ships from dozens of other species, many of which the Zephyrians recognized as their former subjects. The variety was staggering: sleek Altarian cruisers that had supposedly been destroyed centuries ago, massive Corvan dreadnoughts that should have been impossible to build without access to neutron starforges, and stranger vessels that defied easy classification. They've not only preserved the technologies of conquered species, Kexthal reported, but they've improved upon them. That Corvan dreadnought, for instance, appears to be armed with weapons that exceed anything the original Corvan Empire possessed.
How many of our former subjects have joined this coalition? Velnath asked.
All of them, Kexthal replied quietly.
Every species we thought we had successfully conquered. Every world we believed was pacified. They've all been working together, sharing technology, pooling resources, for the sole purpose of destroying us.
The implications were staggering. The Zephyrian Empire wasn't just facing a human rebellion, they were facing a galaxy-wide uprising that had been centuries in the making. Every act of conquest, every demonstration of divine power, every world they had ground under their heel had contributed to this moment.
Incoming transmission from the human fleet, the communications officer announced.
Admiral Chen appeared on the main display, but she was no longer alone. Around her stood representatives of every major species in the coalition, beings the Zephyrians had believed broken, scattered, or extinct. The sight of them standing together, united in purpose, was more unsettling than any weapon display could have been.
Supreme Overlord HFY, Admiral Chen began, her voice carrying easily through the quantum communication link. I believe introductions are in order. Allow me to present the unified leadership of the Liberation Coalition. One by one, the representatives stepped forward to identify themselves.
General Morkath of the Altarian Resistance, supposedly dead for 3 centuries.
Prime Engineer Zolgoth of the Corvan Reconstruction Corps, representing a people the Zephyrians thought they had exterminated.
Captain Vexera of the Thraxian Liberation Fleet, speaking for a species that had been conquered so thoroughly they were no longer considered a threat.
Each introduction was a knife thrust into Zephyrian assumptions about their own invincibility.
These weren't primitive rebels or desperate refugees, these were the survivors of galactic civilizations, and they had spent centuries preparing for revenge.
You're wondering how we did it, Admiral Chen continued, correctly reading the shock on Zephyrian faces. How we hid so many ships, so many people, so many worlds from your divine sight. The answer is simple: we learned from you.
The display shifted to show a holographic representation of Zephyrian space, but with overlay patterns that revealed hidden structures throughout the Empire.
Secret bases disguised as mining operations. Refugee populations hidden within conquered worlds. Supply networks that had operated under Zephyrian noses for centuries. Every time you conquered a world, you left survivors, Admiral Chen explained. Refugees who escaped in the chaos, resistance fighters who went underground, entire populations that you thought you had eliminated but who actually went into deep hiding. You never bothered to verify because gods don't concern themselves with such details. Those survivors found each other. They found us. And, together, we built something you never imagined possible: hope. Not just the hope that you could be resisted, but the certainty that you would be destroyed. General Morkath stepped forward, his scarred Altarian features harsh with decades of suppressed rage. My people had a saying before you murdered our homeworld: the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of tyrants. We have been refreshing that tree for 300 years, and now it bears fruit. You think yourselves gods, Prime Engineer Zolgoth added, his massive Corvan frame bristling with mechanical augmentations. But gods create. Gods inspire. Gods give life meaning. You only take, only destroy, only rule through fear. You are parasites wearing the mask of divinity. Captain Vexera, her scaled Thraxian features cold with controlled fury, spoke last. My ancestors watched your ships burn our moon colonies. They swore an oath that their children's children would see justice done. That oath has been passed down for 8 generations. Today, we fulfill it. Admiral Chen stepped forward again. This isn't a battle, THYSSCAR. This isn't even a war. This is an execution.
The execution of false gods by the free peoples of the galaxy.
You have one chance to avoid total annihilation: surrender unconditionally, submit to trial for crimes against civilization itself, and accept whatever punishment our combined peoples deem appropriate.
THYSSCR's crystalline form flared with outrage. You dare demand the surrender of gods themselves? We who have ruled this galaxy since before your species learned to use tools? We are eternal. We are infinite. We are beyond your comprehension.
You're about to be beyond existence, Admiral Chen replied calmly.
Final warning. Stand down or be destroyed.
The communication ended, leaving the Zephyrian command center in tense silence. For long moments, the only sound was the hum of the ship's reality manipulation engines as they prepared for battle.
My lord, Fleet Admiral Kexthal said finally, perhaps we should consider their terms. The odds are unacceptable. THYSSCR roared, his form exploding into pure energy before reconstituting itself. We do not negotiate with our own subjects. We do not surrender to inferior beings. We are gods, and gods do not bow.
Then, gods die, a new voice said from behind them. The entire command crew spun toward the sound, weapons appearing in their hands as they searched for the source. There, standing calmly in the center of the command deck despite the impossibility of her presence, was Admiral Chen herself.
How? THYSSCR demanded, reality warping around him as he prepared to unmake the impossible intruder.
Oh, that's simple, Admiral Chen replied, seemingly unconcerned by the divine energy crackling around her.
We learned how to do that too.
She gestured, and her form flickered, revealing sophisticated holographic equipment. But, before the Zephyrians could react to the deception, the real trap was sprung. Throughout the ship, reality anchors activated, their fields expanding to encompass the entire command deck. Suddenly, THYSSCR found himself unable to manipulate the fundamental forces around him. His divine powers, stripped away by human technology, left him feeling more naked and vulnerable than he had in 10,000 years. You see, Admiral Chen continued, her projection smiling with genuine satisfaction, we've spent 5 centuries studying every aspect of your civilization. Your technology, your tactics, your psychology, and, most importantly, your weaknesses.
Did you really think beings who call themselves gods would be humble enough to consider the possibility of defeat?
Alarms began sounding throughout the ship as reports flooded in from across the fleet. Human infiltration teams, having somehow bypassed every security measure the Zephyrians possessed, were activating reality anchors on every major vessel simultaneously. Impossible, Velnath whispered, her nebular form struggling to maintain coherence without access to her reality warping abilities.
Our ships are secured by dimensional locks.
Nothing can penetrate them without our knowledge.
Nothing you know about, Admiral Chen corrected.
But, your former subjects taught us quite a bit about Zephyrian security protocols. Amazing how helpful people become when you're offering them a chance at revenge against their oppressors.
The tactical display updated to show the true scope of the human operation.
It wasn't just the flagship, throughout the Great Fleet, reality anchors were coming online, stripping the Zephyrian vessels of their primary advantage. Without their godlike powers, the Zephyrian ships were still formidable, but they were no longer invincible.
You have 30 seconds to order fleet-wide surrender, Admiral Chen announced.
After that, we begin the liberation of this galaxy from your tyranny. THYSSCR looked around at his powerless council members, at the panicking crew, at the displays showing human forces surrounding them on all sides. For 10,000 years, they had ruled through absolute power. Now, for the first time in their eternal existence, they were facing an enemy that had found a way to take that power away.
Never, he snarled. We will fight.
We will show you that even without our divine abilities, we are still superior to any mortal species.
All ships, open fire.
Show these primitives the price of challenging gods.
The Great Fleet opened fire, their conventional weapons still devastating despite the loss of their reality warping capabilities.
Beams of coherent energy lanced across space, seeking to burn the human coalition from existence.
But, the humans were ready for this too. As the Zephyrian weapons struck the coalition fleet, something impossible happened.
The human ships absorbed the energy. Their hulls, which should have vaporized under the assault, instead began to glow with stored power. Energy conversion armor, Admiral Chen explained, watching THY Scar's expression of growing horror.
Another gift from your former subjects. Every shot you fire makes us stronger. The Coalition fleet returned fire, and now their weapons carried the accumulated energy of the Zephyrian opening volley.
Condensed matter rounds moving at relativistic speeds tore through Zephyrian hulls like paper.
Ships that had conquered worlds died in seconds under the overwhelming firepower.
But, worse than the destruction was the coordination.
The Coalition fleet moved like a single organism, each ship perfectly positioned to support its neighbors.
When Zephyrian vessels tried to break through their lines, they found themselves facing concentrated fire from dozens of ships simultaneously. When they tried to retreat, they discovered that their escape routes had been cut off by perfectly positioned human forces.
How? THY Scar demanded, watching his supposedly invincible fleet being systematically dismantled. How are you coordinating so many ships across such distances? Quantum entanglement communication networks, Admiral Chen replied.
Another technology we developed specifically for fighting gods. Every ship in our fleet is connected to every other ship instantaneously, regardless of distance. We think as one, act as one, fight as one. The battle, if it could even be called that, continued for 3 hours. When it ended, the great fleet that had once terrorized a galaxy lay in ruins. Of the 5,000 vessels that had represented the pinnacle of Zephyrian military might, fewer than 100 remained functional.
Those survivors found themselves surrounded by human ships, their weapons trained and ready to fire.
THY Scar slumped in his command chair, his crystalline form dim and cracked from the psychic shock of absolute defeat. Around him, the other council members had reverted to their most basic forms, their divine confidence shattered beyond repair. Surrender transmission incoming, the communications officer announced weakly. Admiral Chen appeared on the screen one final time, but now she was flanked by human and alien officers on the bridge of her command ship. Behind them, through the viewports, the remnants of the Great Fleet could be seen drifting powerless in space.
Supreme Overlord THY Scar, she began formally. The Zephyrian Empire is hereby dissolved.
Your Great Fleet has been neutralized. Your reality manipulation capabilities have been permanently suppressed by quantum field generators we've placed throughout this system. You and your council are ordered to surrender unconditionally for trial by the peoples of the galaxy. THY Scar looked up at the screen, his voice barely a whisper. What will you do with us?
That's not my decision to make, Admiral Chen replied.
Representatives from every world you conquered, every species you enslaved, every civilization you destroyed will decide your fate. I suspect they'll have quite a lot to say about 10,000 years of oppression. The transmission ended, and human boarding shuttles began launching toward the surviving Zephyrian vessels. For the first time in their eternal existence, the beings who had called themselves gods were about to face judgment by their former subjects.
The age of divine rule was over. The age of freedom had begun.
The tribunal station hung in space at the exact center of what had once been the Zephyrian Empire, a massive structure built from the combined technologies of 50 liberated species. It was both courthouse and symbol, a declaration that the age of divine rule had ended and the age of justice had begun. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the great viewing window in the station's command center, watching as representatives from across the galaxy arrived for the trials. Ships of every conceivable design filled the space around the station, sleek Altarian cruisers bearing survivors who had hidden in the outer rim for centuries, massive Corvan industrial vessels that had been converted to carry refugee populations, and hundreds of human ships that had served as the backbone of the Liberation Fleet. Final count, Admiral, asked Captain Marcus Webb, her chief of staff. 2,417 separate species or subspecies represented, Chen replied without turning from the window. Some of them we thought were extinct. Others we didn't even know existed until they revealed themselves after the victory. Every single one has a story about Zephyrian oppression. Any word from Earth Command about the trials? Full support, as expected. Though they're concerned about the scope of what we're attempting. Trying 10 beings for crimes spanning 10,000 years and affecting thousands of species, it's never been done before.
Webb nodded thoughtfully. The logistics alone are staggering. We've had to develop new translation protocols just to allow all the different species to communicate effectively. And the legal frameworks will have to be created as we go, Chin finished. But that's what we do as humans, Marcus. We adapt. We improvise. We find a way to make the impossible work. She turned from the window to face him. Besides, after everything it took to get to this point, organizing a trial seems almost simple. The trials had been delayed for 6 months while the Liberation Coalition dealt with the immediate aftermath of victory. Zephyrian subject worlds had to be transitioned to self-governance, refugee populations needed to be resettled, and the complex task of dismantling an empire that spanned half the galaxy required careful coordination. Most challenging had been the task of containing the Zephyrians themselves. Even with their reality manipulation abilities suppressed, they were still incredibly dangerous beings with access to technologies that could devastate worlds. The solution had been typically human. Instead of trying to build a prison strong enough to hold them, they had built a space where holding them was unnecessary. The Zephyrians were confined to a specially constructed habitat aboard the Tribunal Station, one that exactly duplicated their homeworld environment but existed in a state of permanent quantum isolation. They could live comfortably, but they could not escape, communicate with the outside universe, or access any technology more advanced than basic environmental controls. The first session begins in 2 hours, Webb reminded her. Are you ready? Chen smiled grimly. I've been ready for this moment since the first refugee ship reached Earth 5 centuries ago and told us what we were really facing out here. The question is whether the Zephyrians are ready to face the consequences of 10 millennia of oppression. In their quantum-isolated habitat, the former Zephyrian Council was experiencing emotions they had not felt in so long they barely remembered the words for them. Fear. Anxiety. Helplessness. For beings who had spent 10,000 years as the absolute rulers of half the galaxy, the experience of powerlessness was almost incomprehensible. Thysskar paced the length of his cell, though calling it a cell was perhaps unfair, since it was larger and more comfortable than the palaces of most planetary rulers. The humans, with their typical attention to detail, had researched Zephyrian physiology extensively and provided an environment that met all their biological needs. They had even included recreational facilities and access to non-sensitive historical databases. What they had not provided was any sense of control over their own fate. How long has it been? Asked Velnath, her nebular form dim and constantly shifting with anxiety. 237 days since our capture, Mordun replied, his dark matter form barely maintaining coherence. Not that time has any meaning in this place. They're deliberately keeping us waiting, observed Kexthal, the former fleet admiral whose geometric patterns now seemed jagged and unstable. It's psychological warfare. They want us to anticipate what's coming, to imagine all the possible punishments. What could they possibly do to us that would matter? Thysskar asked, though his voice lacked its former confidence. We are immortal beings. Physical punishment cannot truly harm us. Imprisonment, as we have seen, is merely inconvenience. What do mortals know of consequences that would affect gods? The answer came in the form of a holographic projection that appeared in the center of their common area. It showed the main courtroom of the Tribunal Station, a vast amphitheater designed to accommodate representatives from thousands of different species. The architecture was deliberately neutral, borrowing elements from dozens of different cultural traditions to create a space that belonged to no single species but represented all of them. At the center of the chamber stood a raised platform where the accused would be placed. Surrounding it in concentric rings were seating areas for the prosecutors, the defenders, and the representatives of the affected species. Above it all, suspended in a complex arrangement that suggested both balance and judgment, were the seats where the tribunal judges would preside. Impressive, Thysskar admitted grudgingly. For mortals, they have created something approaching the grandeur of divine architecture. Look at the judges' seats, Velnath said quietly. The camera angle shifted to show the judicial panel more clearly. 5 beings sat in judgment, Admiral Chan representing humanity, General Morkath speaking for the Altarian survivors, Prime Engineer Zulgoth for the Corvan reconstruction efforts, Captain Vexera for the Thraxian liberation movement, and a 5th figure they didn't immediately recognize, a tall, ethereal being whose species was unfamiliar. Who is the 5th? Kexthal wondered. Their answer came from an unexpected source. A new voice, calm and measured, spoke from behind them. That would be me. Or rather, my physical form attending the trial. The Zephyrians spun toward the sound, and their forms flickered with shock as they recognized the speaker. It was impossible, but standing before them was another member of their own species, one they had not seen for over 8,000 years. Zarneth, Thysscar breathed, his crystalline form paling. But, you're dead. We watched you die when you opposed our rule over the Andorian systems. I was presumed dead, the ancient Zephyrian corrected, his form more stable and somehow more substantial than those of his former colleagues. In reality, I was rescued by the very refugees our empire created. I've spent the last 8 millennia working with the resistance movements, learning about the civilizations we destroyed, and preparing for this moment. The implications were staggering. If Zarneth had survived, had been working with the coalition from the beginning, then, the scope of the conspiracy against them was even greater than they had imagined. One of their own kind had been instrumental in their downfall. Why? Velnath asked, her form flickering with confusion and betrayal. We were gods together. We ruled the galaxy as one divine pantheon. Why would you turn against your own nature? Zarneth moved closer to the viewing projection, his ancient eyes reflecting the light of the courtroom. Because I learned something in those 8 millennia that you never did. I learned what we had actually become. He gestured toward the projection, where representatives from thousands of species were taking their seats. Look at them, Thysscar. Really look. Each one of those beings represents a civilization we destroyed, a culture we eliminated, a people we thought we had the right to rule simply because we were powerful enough to enforce our will. They are our subjects, Thysscar replied, though his voice lacked conviction. It is the natural order. The strong rule the weak. No, Zarneth said firmly. The strong protect the weak. The powerful serve those who cannot protect themselves. That is what true divinity looks like. What we became, what you still are, is the opposite of divine. You are parasites who consumed civilizations and called it government. The projection shifted to show individual faces in the crowd of survivors, descendants of survivors, representatives of species that had rebuilt themselves from the ashes of Zephyrian conquest. Each face told a story of loss, suffering, and, ultimately, resilience. I have met beings whose entire species was reduced to a few dozen survivors, Zarneth continued. I have spoken with children who learned their grandparents' language in secret because we had declared it illegal. I have seen whole worlds turned into graveyards because we needed the space for our monuments. They needed our guidance, Mordun protested weakly. Without our divine rule, they would have destroyed themselves with wars and conflicts. Really? Zarneth challenged. Look around this station. Thousands of species, many of them former enemies, working together to create something that has never existed before, a truly representative galactic government. They've achieved in 6 months what we never managed in 10,000 years, genuine unity based on mutual respect rather than fear. The truth of his words was undeniable. The tribunal station wasn't just a courthouse, it was a functioning example of interspecies cooperation on a scale that dwarfed anything the Zephyrian Empire had achieved. Different species weren't just coexisting, they were actively collaborating, sharing technologies and ideas, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. The trial begins in 1 hour, Zarneth announced. I wanted to speak with you first, to give you a chance to understand what you're facing. This isn't just a trial for war crimes, though you're certainly guilty of those. This is a trial for the very concept of divine rule itself. The galaxy is deciding whether beings like us have any right to exist. What do you mean? Kexthal asked, though there was growing fear in his geometrically shifting form. The coalition has developed the technology to do more than suppress our reality manipulation abilities, Zarneth explained. They can remove them entirely. Permanently. They can reduce us to the level of any other mortal species. The question before the tribunal is whether that's justice or mercy. The implications hit the former council members like a physical blow. To be stripped of their divine nature, to become truly mortal, to face the prospect of aging and death like any other being, it was a fate worse than any torture they could have imagined. They cannot. THYSSCAR roared, his form flaring with desperate energy. We are eternal. We are beyond such petty concepts as mortality. Are we? Zarnath asked quietly. Because 8,000 years among mortal beings has taught me something important: mortality gives life meaning. Knowing that your time is limited makes every moment precious.
Having to face consequences for your actions makes you consider those actions more carefully. He turned back toward the projection, where the last of the spectators were taking their seats. In 1 hour, you will face judgment by the very beings you spent 10 millennia oppressing. They will decide whether you deserve the chance to learn what I learned: that true divinity isn't about power over others, but about service to others.
And if they decide we don't deserve that chance? Velnath asked.
Then, you'll face the only punishment that truly matters to immortal beings, Zarnath replied.
Absolute isolation. Permanent imprisonment in quantum fields that will last until the heat death of the universe.
Conscious, aware, but completely cut off from any interaction with the rest of reality.
The chamber fell silent as the full weight of their situation became clear.
They weren't just facing trial for their crimes, they were facing the possibility of fates that would make death seem merciful by comparison. There is one alternative, Zarnath said softly.
Genuine remorse.
Honest acknowledgement of the harm you've caused. A sincere commitment to making amends for 10,000 years of oppression. The Coalition isn't interested in revenge, they want justice. But justice and mercy aren't mutually exclusive. He began to fade as his projection time expired.
Think about it.
In 1 hour, you'll have the chance to show whether you're still capable of growth, change, and redemption. Whether you're still capable of becoming the gods you once pretended to be. An hour later, the 5 members of the former Zephyrian Council were escorted into the main courtroom of the tribunal station. The scale of the chamber was overwhelming. Thousands of representatives from across the galaxy filled every available seat, and the air hummed with translation protocols handling hundreds of different languages simultaneously. At the center of the great amphitheater, the accused were placed on the judgment platform, surrounded by fields that not only suppressed their abilities but made their every word and gesture visible to the entire assembly. There would be no hiding, no deception, no retreat behind divine mystique. The trial that followed would last for months and hear testimony from survivors of every major Zephyrian atrocity across 10 millennia. It would establish new precedents for interspecies law and create frameworks for justice that would endure for thousands of years. Most importantly, it would demonstrate that even gods could be held accountable for their actions. But perhaps the most significant moment came during THYSSCAR's final statement, when the former Supreme Overlord looked out at the thousands of beings he had once ruled and spoke words that no Zephyrian had uttered in 10,000 years. We were wrong.
I was wrong. We thought power gave us the right to rule. We believed might made right.
We convinced ourselves that we were gods when we were merely tyrants with advanced technology. The galaxy is better without our rule, and we are not worthy of the title we claimed. The sentence, when it came, was perhaps the most creative punishment in galactic history. The Zephyrians would be stripped of their immortality and their reality manipulation abilities, reduced to the same level as any other species. But, instead of imprisonment or execution, they would be required to spend the remainder of their now limited lifespans working to repair the damage they had caused. They would help rebuild destroyed worlds. They would assist in relocating refugee populations. They would use their extensive knowledge of Zephyrian technology to help liberated species defend themselves against future threats. In essence, they would serve the very beings they had once oppressed. It was a punishment that transformed justice into redemption, revenge into reconstruction. And, as Admiral Chen watched the former gods begin their first day of community service, she reflected that perhaps the most human thing of all was the belief that anyone, even gods, could change for the better. The age of divine rule was over. The age of universal cooperation had begun. And, for the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy was truly free.